words of joy and hope. It is the feast of the baptism of the Lord. The Gospel of Matthew 3:13-17. And the commentaries by Father Fernando Armelini. A good Sunday to all. It will be useful to introduce today's evangelical text with a brief presentation of the place to which the text refers to. It has a theological meaning, as it also often happens in the Bible. Tradition places the baptism of Jesus in Betabara. You can see it indicated on the map. It is located 9 kilometers north of the Dead Sea. Today is Jordan, present-day Jordan. The Jordan River is quoted 179 times in the Bible, therefore is of great importance, but is not of economic importance. Along the banks of this river, no big city has emerged. It is the difference with the great rivers admired by the Israelites, the Nile in Egypt, and the Tigris and the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Important empires were born along these great rivers. The Jordan River had no importance of this kind. What did the Jordan River mean in the Bible? It was important to point out a border between pagan, idolatrous land and the land of freedom. What did the Baptist do? He preached conversion. He made people aware that they were sinners. Then he baptized those who came to him. The Hebrews, especially the people more observant of tradition, such as the monks of Qumran and the Pharisees, had many ablutions to purify themselves. Archaeologists have found many of these wells. At least 100 existed near the temple in Jerusalem. But the rite of baptism was a very particular submersion. It had the symbolic meaning of making the previous person disappear, as if she or he be dead. Then a new person was born from the water. This rite was done, for example, when a pagan became a Hebrew. They had to declare that they renounced the cult of pagan divinity and professed the faith in the one God. Then if he was a male, he was circumcised and then baptized. It meant that the previous man, the pagan, as if he had never existed, and a Jew was born from the water. The strange thing about this is that John called to be baptized not the pagans, but the Hebrew people, those who being Abraham's children, considered that they had already obtained salvation. They felt good, free. They had already reached the promised land. The Baptists questioned this belief. You have not yet reached the promised land. You are still in the pagan world. Therefore, the Baptists asked them, return to the pagan land because you must make a new exodus. You must pass across the Jordan River again before entering the land of true freedom. The evangelist John says that all of Judea went to be baptized, went to the Baptist. They returned to the other side of the Jordan in the land of slavery, and this gesture served to raise awareness that they needed to think of another promised land. That which the Baptist has indicated and would have introduced the people to the land of true freedom. This is why when the Pharisees and Sadducees go to the Baptist, and by the way, they didn't want to be baptized, They didn't feel this need because they had no conscience of being still slaves. The Baptist challenges them. He says, "Race of vipers, who has taught you to escape the coming condemnation? Do not think it is enough to say, Our father is Abraham, for I tell you that from these stones I could draw children of Abraham." They must realize their condition of slavery, not of a material slavery, or even though they were subject to the Roman Empire, but of a slavery that prevented them from really being people, slaves of their own passions, of their own pride, their own evils, the infidelity to the Torah and to the word of the prophets. All this makes the person a slave, and there is a need to become aware of this reality, of this fact. It is in this cultural and religious context when Jesus leaves Nazareth, goes down to Bethabara to be baptized by John. It is the beginning of the public life of Jesus that Matthew narrates beginning in the 3rd chapter. And all the other evangelists begin their gospel with the baptism of Jesus, when Jesus begins the public life, when Jesus goes to Bethabara to be baptized by John. At the end of the 2nd chapter, the Gospel of Matthew presents Jesus coming back to Nazareth from Egypt with his parents when he is about 2 years old. Then, in the 3rd chapter, Jesus enters the scene again when he is 34 years old. Therefore, 32 years have passed between the end of the 2nd chapter and the beginning of the 3rd chapter. What has happened in these 34 years of Jesus' life? We will never know. The apocryphal Gospels have tried to respond to our curiosity by inventing many tales, and we know them very well, but those are not important for our faith. We are only interested in the time when Jesus presented himself to the world publicly to give us a true image of God and how the whole complete person should be. The strange thing is that Jesus goes to Bethabara to be baptized. Then after baptism, he will not return to Nazareth. He will begin his public life in Capernaum, as we know. But the strange thing is that he comes to be baptized because no one would have expected a Messiah to be a sinner, to go to the Baptist, to join all the other sinners, seeking conversion. No. The Messiah should not fulfill this rite, this gesture. In fact, that Jesus had been baptized together with sinners brought problems to the first Christians, since he was not a sinner. Let us listen to what happened. Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John tried to prevent him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and yet you are coming to me?" Jesus said to him in reply, "Allow it now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." Then he allowed him. The Orthodox Church that you see behind me indicates the precise place where the Baptist was and where Jesus went to be baptized. It is located in the eastern part of the Jordan River, the same river that then had to be crossed to begin the new Exodus with Jesus guiding these people, leading them to the land of the true freedom. The place is called Bethabara. This Hebrew word comes from Beth, the house, and Abbar, which means to cross. It is the place of the ford, the place where the people of Israel, who came from the land of slavery in Egypt, had crossed the desert and had passed the Jordan River right here in Betabara and had entered the promised land. Now, there was a counter exodus requested by the Baptist, and then crossing the Jordan again to the true exodus that must lead to the kingdom of God. What does the Baptist do when Jesus arrives to be baptized? He wants to prevent it. Why? It is as if the Baptist is saying to Jesus, Jesus, you are out of place here. I don't understand what you come here to do. And in fact, the Baptist could not understand the option made by Jesus because it did not correspond to the idea that the Baptist had in mind about the Messiah. A Messiah who, being righteous, could not mix with sinners. And shortly after, the Baptist will enter into crisis because he had the image of a God, of a Messiah sent by God, who should resemble the God of the Old Testament, therefore, who was far away from sinners, from lepers. But the God presented in the face of Jesus is completely different. Jesus will be with sinners, with those who have been wrong in life, with tax collectors. According to the criteria and expectations of the Baptist, Jesus begins the wrong way, and he wants to stop him. This gesture of the Baptist is similar to what Peter will do a little later with Jesus, not to allow Jesus to travel a certain path that does not fit his messianic criteria. And here the Baptist behaves as Peter will do later, and Jesus will call Satan Peter. You oppose the path that I must travel. The Baptist does exactly the same gesture as Peter. He wants to stop Jesus because he doesn't understand what Jesus is doing. In some translations, the original text has not been well translated because when Jesus says, do what I tell you, and then the Baptist agrees to baptize Jesus, and the text says, before this, John accepted, but the Greek word is aphesin. It means left, not that he accepted. He left. He left him, leaves him. It is an expression that appears twice in the Gospel of Matthew. Once here when the Baptist left him, and then after the third temptation, chapter 4 of Matthew, when Satan left him, 4:11. Aphesin, the devil left him. He did not let Jesus to accept his proposal. Here it is as if the Baptist wanted to force Jesus to accept his criteria of justice. Then the Baptist leaves him, accepts that Jesus fulfills his justice, which is not the one of the criteria of justice that the Baptist had in mind, to cut the trees that do not bear fruit, burn the smoking straw in the eternal fire, and so on. Therefore, separation of the good from the bad. No. Now comes the new justice, that it is the total gratuitousness of God's love that Jesus will reveal throughout his public life. What is it that the Baptist did not understand? He did not understand what the Old Testament had already begun to reveal, and it is that God is always with his people unconditionally. This will be done in fullness with Jesus, who is the Emmanuel, God with us. But already the Old Testament showed this unconditional love of God who walked with his people. Recall the column of cloud and fire that accompanied Israel on the desert road. Then the Ark of the Covenant placed in a tent, and this tent was next to the tents of the people of Israel along the way. Then the Temple of Jerusalem, which indicated precisely the presence of God in the middle of Israel. And when these people are deported to Mesopotamia, the prophet Ezekiel sees cherubs who take the Ark of the Covenant, which is the sign of the presence of God, and this ark is carried to the top of the Mount of Olives and from there goes to the east, because God cannot be far from his people. If people are deported, God also goes to be with his people. And again, the prophet Ezekiel, you will see this ark returning to Jerusalem along with his people. Let us now listen to what happens when Jesus leaves the water of the Jordan River. After Jesus was baptized, he came up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened for him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming upon him. And a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." To explain what happened during the baptism of Jesus, the evangelist Matthew uses three biblical images. The first one, the heavens were opened. The rabbis held that the heavens were seven, and over the seventh heaven there was finally the throne of God, and between one heaven and another 500 years of journey were necessary. What had happened? That in the last centuries before Christ, the people had the feeling that God had closed the seven heavens, locked, because they thought that God no longer wanted to have anything to do with his people. The people had been unfaithful. They had not heard the prophets, and now God has grown tired and had not sent other prophets to make his voice heard. Psalm 74 says, "We are given no signs from God, no prophets are left. No one of us knows how long this will be." Psalm 74:9. We don't know how long the silence of God will last that distresses us so much. Also, the prophet Daniel, who says, "We have no chief of prophet, no place to offer you burnt offerings. When will the silence of God end?" They hoped that somehow God would show his face again. They felt sorry for their sins. There is a beautiful prayer that clearly makes reference to the text of the evangelist Matthew in this opening of the heavens that were closed. This prayer of the distressed people is found in chapter 33 of Isaiah, when the people find themselves in these distressing situations. They turn to the heavens and ask God. It's a beautiful prayer. They say to God, "Look at what situation we are in. You were angry and we failed. We were all contaminated. You hid your face, and yet, Lord, you are our Father." It is the first time in the Bible that God is invoked as a father. The Hebrews did not call God Father, but the pagans, they did. The Hebrews already had their father, Abraham. The patriarchs were their fathers. In prayer, God was not invoked as a father. It is the first time that God is called Father. You are our Father. Though Abraham does not know us or Israel acknowledge us, you, Lord, are our Father. Why, Lord, do you make us wander from your ways and harden our hearts so we do not revere you? Isaiah 63, 16, 17. It is like telling God, God, you also have a bit of guilt. You must be attentive as a father to see what suits us. There are none who call upon your name, none who rouse themselves to take hold of you. For you have hidden your face from us and have delivered us up to our crimes. And now the invocation. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. Yet, Lord, you are our Father. You are the clay, and we are the clay, you are the potter. We are the work of your hands. It is a beautiful prayer in which the people invoke the Lord to turn up the heavens. So now what the evangelist Matthew means is that when Jesus begins his public life with baptism, when he comes out of the water, these heavens were opened. The evangelist Mark uses a very strong verb, schizomai, which means torn, broken, in pieces. They cannot be closed again. They will always remain open. It is a very good comparison because since the Son of God became one of us, the heavens cannot close again because in that case the Son would remain outside. That Son who has become one with his people, who are sinners and who make mistakes. The door of the Father's house will remain eternally wide open to collect all his sons and daughters. No one will be excluded. The second image that is used. Jesus sees the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming upon him that has come from heaven. It is the Spirit, this divine force, this divine life that Jesus fully possesses, and it will be the one that will guide him throughout his life. Jesus does not receive orders from outside. He receives them of his divine identity, that life that will later communicate to us. It is the same life as Jesus brought to the world, and we receive the indication on how to live, no more of our instincts, but of the life, divine life that is in us. This Spirit has come down like a dove. What does this comparison mean? It is a biblical image. It's not a flying dove. It is the image of the Spirit that is like a dove. The first memory we have of this dove in the Bible is that of the flood, when harmony between heaven and earth was restored, when peace. Now the Emmanuel is with us, the God with us. The second application the dove has derives from the fact that the dove is gentle. The Spirit of God that falls in fullness in Jesus is like a dove, gentle. We remember that God was throwing fire from heaven, shooting arrows to defeat enemies, and even, of course, evangelists, the Baptist had this image of God coming to cut out the trees and make them to pieces. No, the Spirit will manifest in Jesus with tenderness, with sweetness, with love. He will not cut the bowed rod, he will not extinguish the wick that still smokes. It will always be gentle with people. He will always distinguish very well between the mistake of the one who makes a mistake. Whoever makes a mistake will always be loved by God. This is the unconditional love revealed by the Spirit that animates Jesus as a dove. Also, the dove is the symbol of belonging to the nest itself. The dove always returns to its nest, and the Spirit descends upon Jesus because that is the nest that has fully embraced the Spirit, the divine life. The third biblical image is the voice of heaven, which says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." What is this voice from heaven? It is a very common image used in Jesus' time. Everyone understood the meaning. It is not a material voice. It is an expression that was used frequently in the literature and used when one wanted to attribute a saying, an affirmation to God. In our example, to define the name of God, in the name of God, the identity of Jesus. What does this voice say? This is my beloved Son. The reference is to the second Psalm. Son, when in the Semitic culture it is said that one is the son of a certain father, rather than generated from, it is understood the one who resembles to. The one who resembles not only in the external factions, but especially in what characterizes one as person, the values in which one believes, the moral choices, the way of thinking, of speaking, of behaving, resembles the Father. Therefore, he is a son. If the voice of heaven says, "This is my beloved Son," it means observe him because when you see him, you see me. He is my Son in whom I recognize myself. We are at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, and in this year we will observe this Jesus who makes himself seen. When we see him, we will know that we are seeing the Father in heaven, whom he resembles perfectly. He is the beloved. The reference is to Isaac. Abraham had two children, and one was the favorite, the beloved. And Jesus is presented as the one who is fully involved in the love of the Father, with whom I am well pleased. Here the reference is to the servant of the Lord as presented in chapter 42 of the prophet Isaiah, when God calls this servant and God says, "In you I am pleased." It means that the Father in heaven is recognized in Jesus. It is the invitation during this year that when we hear Jesus and see what he does, we must keep in mind the beloved one of the Father, because it is the invitation to resemble this Jesus, to feel also we that the Father in heaven be pleased with us. I wish you all a good Sunday and a good week.